Welcome to Pondering AI. I'm your host, Kimberly Nevela. Now, as some of you know, hosting the pod is the best job I never wanted, which is all down to my fabulous production team and, of course, our illustrious guests, who not only answer my calls, but take the time to share their unique perspectives and work in AI with all of us, despite my sometimes awkward questioning. So in this episode, which is our last for 2025, we revisit some of the insights gifted by those guests and find out what they think may happen next. So to start, here's a small sampling of what they had to say this year.
There remains such a gap between how we're talking about technology, what is the promise of technology seems to be, and the actual realities of the material current world that we live in today. A really meaningful development and innovation can happen when we, kind of get outside the lab, get outside these often traditional ways of working that designers can have, where they have this great technology and they go in search of a problem to apply it to.
I prefer to participate in conversations around inclusivity that assume there is value and beauty, I guess, and unexpected innovation that can occur in any sort of place and across many groups of people. So I think it's just important to, at least for me, it's always important to stay curious and not make these wild assumptions about where value can be generated or where beauty can come from. I believe it can come from anywhere, really. It's just a matter of, do people have the right sort of serendipitous opportunities, and are they in the right place at the right time to generate that value or to be seen, by the people that can either elevate them to the next level or just acknowledge the work that they're doing.
There are a lot of tricky questions to be asked also with these matters, and they all, in a way, boil down to the issue of power asymmetries, power inequality. If you are a big tech company, you want to bring your technology to people around the world, then you don't do that but you don't involve the speakers themselves. That's you really risk going over their epistemic self-determination, their capacity to determine for themselves how they want to express themselves, how they want to know the world, and how they want to make themselves understandable by others.
There are some places where we can see the early signs of feudal economics, where compute lords own the land. So there are digital producers, the data producers who are digital peasants. I think we need to break the cycle, and we need to require the enforceable rights framework at the data level, not just at the regulation on top, because we need to make sure that AI does not become a technological monopoly, but a opportunity for economic sovereignty and a equitable distribution of opportunity and wealth that comes from this incredible technology.
But each of us have, things that calls for thinking, and that's just, for me, it's important to keep that in mind, that there is a what that needs to be thought about. And then there are lots of what's that are just competing for our attention. And we should be really good at saying thanks, but no thanks, because this is what calls for thinking. And the second thing we should be asking, as Heidegger put it, is the next question we should ask is, so who can we think with? So what calls for thinking and who can we think with? Because what calls for thinking cannot be thought about with AI. It calls for another human being.
There's a couple of questions I think that are really important. And one of them is, what are we actually referencing in these things when we are relying on an algorithm to answer a question about the world? How much of the answer is the algorithm and how much of it is the world? I think that's a really important critical question to be asking in all kinds of ways. The other question I think that's really kind of related to that is, what are we doing that we are not doing when we use AI? Where do we get lost, right? What is getting taken away from us when we rely on the algorithms to sort a blank page on our behalf? And where might we find some confidence and courage to express that agency, even if it is faulty, even if it is flawed? Where can we engage other people to strengthen that, as opposed to relying on kind of fundamentally an abstraction of the average, right?
And the mantra is, well, teachers can't be there all the time, nurses can't be there all the time, but the robot, the language model is never asleep, it's always there. And that's the kind of mantra I think we should really problematize, because, yeah, there is something always there that can't be turned off, that never sleeps, that never forgets, you know. Mm-hmm. But that's not care, that's not teaching, that's not attention. And these are the things that don't scale. And let's value them more for seeing how poorly these systems that have had more dollars thrown at them than any technology in the history of humanity, how poorly they do at those things.
Yeah, I think it's trying to kind of take back some sort of relationship with the concept of democracy, what we think democracy is, and kind of think about why we think it's important, if we think it's important. Because it's become something of this kind of euphemism for everything good, which is why people say that we can have democratic AI, we can democratize everything, we can do everything, kind of democracy is good, without ever really thinking about it anymore, why it matters, and kind of what's at risk of being lost if we don't have the kind of democracy that we kind of once fought hard for. And then doing what we can as individuals, of course, to kind of choose the platforms and services and do what we can to promote the technology we think is good and conducive to it will be important. And then to try to imagine how we can use technology in better ways that don't diminish or kind of narrow down democracy into something quite technocratic.
But for me, it really comes down to widening our understanding of data a little bit more, that data is not always a digital file. It can be a physical artifact. It can be a physical trace. Data is not always, a data set is not always something to be analyzed through statistical means. It can be something that plays a role in the way how people debate a certain issue in all kinds of other ways. Data can be provocation, data can be a prompt, data can be a counterfactual scenario. So thinking about data a little bit outside of these very narrow confines, I think is one way how we can talk about all of these scary aspects and dangers, maybe a little bit more nuanced.
I think one of my biggest concerns is the creation of dependencies unthinkingly. And so what I hope is that this will allow a pause for thought to think about, where does AI really add value? How can AI be sustainable? And that's not just profitable, it's actually sustainable and actually useful for us and for future generations. And I think that does require a really hard pause in certain areas to really resist the kind of, the siren call of innovation, to stop and think about, actually, what innovation do we want? So my hope is that by turning this lens to think about people and to think about human rights and to think about humanity, that we might start asking those big questions and prioritizing people before technology.
This is a cultural shift as well, right? Because a lot of the discussion around ethics and trust, it's seen as kind of like having to do your homework, like something frustrating you have to do when you'd much rather do other things. But if we can find ways in which it can actually empower the technology, can improve its, think about it in terms of how does it make the technology more resilient to a changing world? How can you make it more adaptable to very different contexts, very different populations? Then you can also see a way in which you can, in effect, monetize this. You can show there's an economic advantage.
Where the rubber meets the road, where the ethical criticisms that we all are attuned to where that meets the road, where risk management frameworks meet the road, is really with the dev team itself. So empower your engineers to have these discussions. Those who are invested in it will show themselves. They'll help to steer the process in new and better ways. They'll become better at foresight and anticipation of potential social problems down the line. And hopefully we'll see a better product environment in the future because of that.
And I think we need to dive more deeply into kind of quote unquote the less technical end of things and more kind of the user end of things. What kind of processes would it be legitimate for me to even build? And I want to go back to something I said earlier on this call, use cases. What should I build and what should I not build? There should be a conversation about that, because building processes is no longer the territory of only engineers. It's actually anyone.
Probably all as society going to have to become more comfortable with probabilities, because you hear this thing all the time where it's like, well, we can't guarantee it, so we won't do it at all. And that to me is like saying like, well, there's a chance that your climbing rope will snap, so you should probably climb without one. It's like, really? That's your conclusion?
Every time it tells you yes or it tells you no. It's a gamble for you as a user, whether you trust it or not. Because when I use it, for me, it's always a question of how important would be a problem for me if I blindly trusted this answer.
I think people don't understand how hard it is to get right. Yeah. I think that is key. And again, why most of this conversation hasn't been about education and about literacy and about culture. People just don't understand what it takes to get this right. And I think now that we're shifting into this sort of the next stage, which is agentic AI, where you have an AI that acts as an agent on your behalf. It might take the input as an input, the output from another model. You have fewer humans in the loop, fewer potential for human oversight for these different models. It's even more critically important that we talk about things like accountability. And I can also tell your listeners that what we've been describing, what we've been talking about, like this affects everybody.
What I can say is that when it comes to this question of who's responsible, I think the answer has to be all of us, that all of us are responsible. And the level of responsibility that you have is not tied to how much harm you've done necessarily, but how much power you have. Like, what is your position in this society? What is your position in this world? How much are you able to enact and make happen? And that's something that I really want to continue to bring forward in these conversations, is that there are so many practical and tactical things that all of us, and especially these tech companies, can be doing to prevent this kind of misuse.
And when we demand responsible tools, when we demand large language models, chat GPTs, that don't hallucinate, that don't engage in false sources, that are robustly disclosing to us what the risks are, then we're going to get better results. And so there's a lot of power in the retail aspect, but it's not something we feel, right? Because it's one little person. You're like, what difference can I make? And the answer is, well, you can make a difference if all the people around you are doing the same things. And we eventually get a better result.
What do you value? And instead of discrediting that, instead of putting it to the side, instead of saying, I'll do that in 60 years, or I'll, hopefully that'll become a part of it. Ask yourself, how does that reflect into your work? How has that led to your current success? And how can you lean into that more? And that's really where I see people both get that joy out of their work, but also build really amazing companies and products.
2025 has been tumultuous, to say the least, and 2026 is shaping up to be every bit as interesting. Here's what some of our guests think might happen next.
I mean, I it's like, I love this question, and I'm trying to rack my brain now. Like, what would I offer? Because I'm not necessarily like the most intense of doomers. There's a lot of folks out there that would offer like a kind of doom level prediction. I'm also not like an intense hyper optimist. What would I like to see? What would I like to see? In a weird way, I mean, how dreamy. I was gonna say world peace. I was gonna say I'd like to see the things slow down, like that, like the promises of AI scaling as rapidly as they say it as actually slows down and things stall out, and the stall creates time for the US and China to think more collaboratively about how to approach this. It seems like China is almost a little bit more kind of open to this at the point right now. But we open the door for communication and setting some kind of global standards about what it is we care about, and preventing potentially the worst possible outcomes. But I think that's way too like pie in the sky and like impractical and unlikely. So it's like I would put that as happening as like maybe 20%. But what's a more likely prediction? I think probably a more likely prediction is that a major company, either banking, fintech, or health company, possibly like airlines, like one of the major kind of industries is going to have just a major like kind of AI catastrophe, either where folks like die, like human lives are lost, or significant financial impacts happen, like some bot goes haywire and starts like selling stock in a way that it shouldn't, or the market gets disrupted. It's like but I think it's going to be relatively isolated. I think like my prediction would be it would just be one company and not like a whole industry. At least I hope so, because I'm like, if a whole industry ends up tanking, then we're in trouble for a whole lot of ways. But I think it's going to be as kind of like a canary in the coal mine. And so my hope would be that wakes and shakes people up, especially in policy and government, to start possibly regulating a bit more. And I'll put that at 50-50. I'll give that a 50-50 shot.
I don't think it's rosy, but I think we'll see a lot less data center activity, and unfortunately, a lot more economic pain because of it. I think we're overinflated, and I think 2026 becomes a year of correction when it comes to data center builds. And so, what I would like to see is innovations around the heat exchange. If we can create new processes that allow for heat exchange that is not water intensive, and also not in some other way, pollutive or extractive, and doesn't require a lot of electricity to run. If we can somehow start innovating around these areas where data centers are problematic, so innovating around how hot the chips run, so they don't require as much water or as much electricity, or if we can innovate and find new ways to build or focus on old ways to build AI technology that don't require as much compute power. I think those kind of innovations would be very welcome. And I think they would also drive less data center activity, but hopefully less financial pain from that loss of activity.
I think the bubble will at least deflate. Maybe not completely collapse, but it will be deflated. Not everybody will talk on agentic AI, but maybe on the other side, more companies will think about really implementing stuff and not talking about that and having this inflated expectation, but implementing small things to get into that and be part of the 5%, something like that. This will be one thing. I have a little bit of a more optimistic prediction and maybe more futuristic predictions. Maybe not in 26, but at least in 27. We will find mechanisms that AI agents will build themselves, partly, that there will be less engineering. At the moment, the cost for AI agents with smaller use cases are prohibitive. We are thinking about that, and I know others are thinking about that as well. And there is one more thing, which is even maybe a little bit more futuristic. You know that, but many people don't know that the models don't learn at the moment. So they learn because they have the conversation history in their prompts, and maybe OpenAI and co save some things of past conversation and put it into the history. If we had models which could do a little bit of an advanced learning, if, for instance, an agentic process sees that something fails, some processing fails, gets a message from the supervisor, this wasn't correct, and build that again in an automated fashion without anybody doing prompt engineering or so, into its agentic system would help greatly. And there are ideas how to do that, but it's not production grade at the moment.
I feel we will see a real big AI security breach. I hope that I'm mistaken. But due to all factors that we've seen lately, I feel like it will be coming and it will be published and people will be talking about it. I hope that I will see more and more vendors getting educated about AI security and getting a plan on what to do when the AI security incident will happen, because it's already coming and it's already here. But I feel like people and professionals are trying. I see practitioners really trying, and they are confused from the vast of information you got online. So my one advice will be just stay focused. Choose your one source of truth. OWASP is great. CSA is great. One professional or practitioner you believe to and you trust, and then follow him on or her, and just go with one strategy to deal with it instead of just running around and being afraid of it.
I think it's quite likely there will be some sort of minor correction. I have no idea how big the correction will be. I think people should expect it because we've seen it with virtually every technology kind of in a revolution over the last, 50 years. So expect that. But I think keep in mind that the benefits of AI will take longer than you think. They are real, but they will take longer than you think. And, there's a sense of having to be in there for the long term if you're going to be serious about deploying the technology at scale.
Right or wrong, ready or not, here 2026 comes. Before signing off to greet the new year, I want to give a personal shout out to our amazing production team. This includes Maddie Werner, who keeps this train on the track, Jesse Ollie, who makes us all look and sound great, Jonathan Eschelman, who makes it all public, Michael Penwell, who wrangles YouTube, and Evan Markfield, who helps with all of the above and blogs about it to boot. I will also be eternally grateful to Chrissy Richardson, who composed our original soundtrack and worked ceaselessly in the early days and years to make us look and sound great. So to continue this adventure with us in 2026, subscribe now. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts and also on YouTube.